It was nearly the end of summer. There was to be a fireworks display on the final week of the school holidays. Everyone was looking forward to it, even the engines, who didn't mind all the extra work. But that week, the weather changed for the worst. "Ooh," shivered Percy. "I hope this wet weather passes quickly." "Don't worry, I'm sure it will," replied Thomas as he went on his way. "It'll be gone before you know it." But he was very wrong. That night, a fierce summer storm came. The ships at sea depended on the lighthouse to keep them safely off the rocks. But once again, there was trouble. "The lighthouse lamp has gone out again," cried the captain. "Steer hard over to port, matey." "Aye, aye, captain." One of the lighthouse workers clambered down to signal for any approaching engines, but none came. "Oh dear," he cried, hearing the ship's cry of SOS. "I'll never get the light going again on time." Without the light to guide them, the ship steered towards the rocks, out of control. The crew abandoned ship quickly as she tore into the rocks. The ship rested for a moment and then, with a mournful sigh, slid backwards and sank. It was morning by the time the lighthouse worker had managed to fix what he could. None of the ship's crew or captain had been hurt, and there weren't many aboard. A small fishing boat had managed to rescue them, and sailed on towards Brendam docks. The keeper walked down to the lighthouse to survey the extent of the storm damage. "I fixed what I can," the lighthouse worker said. "A power cut damaged some parts in the generator. I reckon we'll need an engineer to give a final examination before we turn the bulb on again." "Well, we won't even be doing that until we get a replacement bulb," the keeper said. "That power cut blew the fuse of the current one. Oh, I'll telephone the railway to deliver a replacement." A yard foreman answered the call. "No problem," he said. "We'll be there right away. I'll send for one of the engines on the Little Western." Unfortunately, Duck and Oliver were much too busy on their branch line. Whilst Donald and Douglas were helping Arthur at the harbour. It turned out only Thomas was available. He was just about to leave for his first branch line train when the inspector spoke to his driver. "Can you help?" he asked. "The lighthouse needs a replacement bulb after last night's storm, and none of the engines on the Little Western can help. Can you take the bulb, please? It shouldn't take too long." "I'm sure we could," replied the driver. "We can take it there and be back in time for our first branch line train." So Thomas set off to the yards to collect his train. When he arrived, the workmen had already loaded the light bulb onto a flatbed truck. "The lighthouse bulb will break easily if you go too fast," said the foreman. "Be sure to go slow and steady. We don't want a repetition of what happened with Edward on New Year's." Oh, what a palaver that was. "I'm sorry there aren't any vans available," he added, "but we've only got flatbeds to spare." "Not to worry, we'll be careful," replied Thomas's driver. He could well remember what had happened before, when Thomas had taken some eggs for Farmer McCall. Once he was coupled up, Thomas headed slowly on his way. Thomas went slowly around bends. Carefully through junctions and yards, cheerfully greeting every engine he passed. rounded another bend. The tracks were quite bumpy. The bulb began to rattle and shake. The driver was getting concerned. "Steady, Thomas," he told him, but they were already in trouble. Up ahead, Harvey was replacing the track they were on, and the workmen had barricaded the track to warn approaching engines. Thomas's driver applied the brakes hard, but Thomas couldn't stop in time. He smashed into the barrier, and the flatbed bumped heavily against him. "Cinders and ashes, what was that?" cried Thomas. The driver looked back and surveyed the damage. He knew from the shattering noise what had happened. "Just as I thought," he said gloomily. "The light bulb was broken. We'll have to go back and collect a spare one." "But what about my passengers?" asked Thomas worriedly. The driver thought for a moment. We'll worry about that when we get back to the yard," he said at last. The workmen meanwhile came over to apologise. "We're sorry about the warning," said one. "At least no one was hurt severely though." "But you certainly passed the crash test though," chuckled another. Neither Thomas nor his crew found that very amusing at all. Thomas was soon puffing steadily back to the yard. Along the way, he met Edward on the route to Misty Valley. Edward was on his way to collect the Chinese dragon for the summer party. Thomas told him what had happened. "Ah, well," sighed the old engine, "these mishaps happen, and I know what you mean," he went on. "It took me 3 attempts when I tried to deliver the light bulb last year. It just goes to show that the lightest of loads can have the biggest of mishaps." Thomas wearily agreed. When he did get back, the workmen had loaded a new light bulb onto the flatbed. "Oh, so much for a light delivery running smoothly this time," sighed the foreman. Thomas was more concerned about his branch line. "My passengers will complain if I don't collect them," he sighed. "With Daisy away, Toby working at the farm, and Rosie working at the quarry, there's no one to help Percy until this afternoon." "Emily's helping out on Edward's branch line," added the driver. "And I'm sure Bertie's got enough work to do as well." Yes, I get the message," said the foreman, frowning gloomily. "Well, I suppose I can leave the light bulb delivery to this afternoon. Just be sure to arrive back here before then. It needs to be delivered before dark to keep the ships at sea safe from rocks and other ocean hazards. We don't want a repeat of what happened last night," he added. "We'll be back before you know it," Thomas said cheerfully. "Still," the foreman sighed as Thomas puffed off, "I hope this weather doesn't decide to turn nasty again." Thomas was busy for the rest of the day, taking passengers up and down the branch line. Luckily, the weather remained sunny with hardly a cloud in sight. It was late afternoon when he arrived back to collect the replacement bulb. This time he was as good as his word. Thomas trundled along without any further mishap, and gave a cheerful greeting to everyone he passed, including Edward, who came along hauling the Chinese dragon. It was starting to get dark when Thomas finally arrived at the lighthouse. He was surprised to see a familiar face greeting him. "About time you arrived," said the keeper. "Hello, Cyril," said Thomas cheerfully. "What are you doing here?" The keeper was surprised, but soon began to chuckle. "Oh, so you know my brother then," he said. "I'm Foggy. Cyril's my identical twin brother. Well, she's a fogman. I'm a lighthouse keeper. Do you know I was once a sailor under the command of the Admiral of Sodor? That was during the 1939-1945 conflict, of course. All through the 7 seas I sailed alongside him. Foggy went on talking for some time about his sailing days. Everyone else set about unloading the new bulb and fitting it in the lighthouse. Once the job was done, Thomas headed on his way. Night had fallen as Thomas trundled wearily back to his ship. At the top of Gordon's Hill, he suddenly stopped and stared. "Come on, Thomas," cried the driver. "This is no time or place to stop." But before he could say anything else, he gasped. There, distant in the clear night sky, the lighthouse beamed across a calm, cool sea. "What a wonderful sight," said the fireman, peering his head through the cab window. Thomas only smiled. "Who'd have thought," he said to himself, "that something so small could shine so bright?" For Thomas, it was the perfect end to a long summer's day full of mishaps and surprises.